Yeah.
So yeah, on the halachic side of things, nice to kind of dovetail the two topics. So, what exactly is the obligation on Rosh Hashanah? Normally, you'll find the Shulchan Aruch Halakhah will begin with who is obligated and who is exempt. There happens to be a pretty clear halachic concept. We'll discuss it. This is as good a time as any. But the Shulchan Aruch holds emphatically, so the Mishnah, the Gemara hold this way, that women are not obligated, not required to hear the shofar. It doesn't mean they're not welcome, doesn't mean that they're not encouraged to. I don't know about the ones with the hijab and the not talking to men, but I think normal women can certainly, are welcome and stand to potentially even benefit from it. The question is, why exactly is this the case? So we have this concept of time-bound mitzvot, mitzvot aseh, shehazman gerama. Literally, mitzvot aseh is a positive commandment, shehazman gerama, where the time is a factor. Time causes the mitzvah to apply or not to apply. So we don't blow the shofar at night. We spoke before about that twilight, literally twilight, is only between the sunset and the starlight. It's called twilight. So twilight, by the way, ben ha'arbaim in Hebrew. Ben ha'arbaim, between the evenings, like between the evening of day one and the night of day two. It's like there's the evening is split in half. There are two evenings there. So twilight, in German they call it Zwielicht. It's like two lights, the two days meet. So, and the fact that it's always a safek, it's always a doubt, it's always a little bit questionable. That's where the concept of the twilight zone comes from.
Oh, that's a great show.
Yeah, it was very thoughtful, deep, and bizarre, but very thoughtful stuff. So the idea of the twilight zone was like this strain, the bizarrerie that comes from not being clear from between two worlds or between concepts. So at the end of the day, it's a Jewish concept. Anyway, so you have a mitzvah that binds us by time. We don't blow the shofar during the rest of the year. It's not an obligation. If you'd like to blow the shofar, you can, but you wouldn't be fulfilling a biblical obligation. Hearing the shofar on the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, assuming it doesn't come out on Shabbat, and it only applies from potentially dawn, but ideally from the sunrise until potentially the stars come out, but ideally until sunset. So sunrise to sunset, you have to hear the shofar 2 days a year. Because the mitzvah is defined by time, women are not obligated to observe it. That's not to say they're not welcome, it's to say that they don't have an obligation, which means they don't have to push off or delay other things or sacrifice other concepts in order to make it. I make the point, for example, that a woman who has little children at home may do the community more of a service by not coming and bringing them with her and disturbing the men above the age of 13 who have the obligation to hear the shofar, than by trying to come and have them hear it. We always do extra tkiyot afterwards anyway for whoever wants to hear it. It's great to inculcate the kids, but there is a biblical obligation that needs to be met. So we should be careful about making sure that at least those who are required to are able to do so. A little bit philosophical, why it is that women are exempt from mitzvot that are bound by time. Perhaps there is a biblical assumption that women are involved in things that occupy quite a bit of time, like raising children or helping others. Maybe society was a little bit more traditional. You had grandmothers and aunts that were all helping whoever recently had a baby, needed help, children preparing for weddings, funerals, ShaBaSh, meals, etc. They used to do a lot more work around the house too, which is to say flour didn't used to come in a bag. You would bring home whole grains and women would be grinding them away at home, pounding spices with a mortar and pestle, preparing their own clothes. So they didn't have as much luxury time at their disposal as they have right now. So no one would discourage women from coming. Just good to know that there is no obligation per se. Beyond this, we do encourage children to come. There is such a concept as chinuch. There is an interesting discussion. The Gemara doesn't really give us an age at which we should necessarily inculcate the kids in mitzvot. We have different ages for a few of them, 5 or 6 or 7, 9 in some cases, but the general rule tends to be that, first of all, as long as the children can control themselves to the point that they don't disrupt or disturb too much, if all I hear is kids crying and I don't hear the shofar, so it's a different kind of crying. It's just not the one the Torah told me to hear on this particular day. and I get plenty of that kind of crying 352 days a year. So normally our first concern is that the kids should not disrupt or distract anyone else from fulfilling the obligation. Once we've cleared that obstacle, usually we try to encourage them to observe mitzvot and to ignore or to avoid averot that they're able to understand. An interesting example of this would be fasting on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. Is it appropriate, is it shayach, is it necessary to encourage kids to fast? So more recent poskim have written, well, it kind of depends on the child's level of understanding. If I tell my less than 2-year-old daughter to fast on Tisha B'Av, she's not going to understand or appreciate anything. She'll get very impatient and very angry very soon. If I allow my 11-and-a-half-year-old son or my 12-year-old son not to fast on Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur, it already gets bizarre. It gets to a point where he knows, he's heard this every year since he's been in school, he knows this is what people do, and it becomes really strange. By the way, this is also a good point to bear in mind when it comes to Shabbat. Technically, if someone needs something on Shabbat, I'm not going to get into all the glorious details, but if there's a child in the area, children aren't obligated in the mitzvot midoraita, they're obligated to be educated midorabanan, but they're obligated from the age of 12 or 13. Asking an 11-year-old girl or a 12-year-old boy or alluding to them that the air conditioner needs to be turned back on, or that the power fell, you have to flip the circuit breaker back on, it becomes very confusing and very difficult for them to handle as they get older. It's really best to do things like this in the event they're necessary with a child who's as young as possible, who can still kind of get it done. Because the older children will sort of realize, how come you're keeping Shabbat and I'm not? Why is it okay for me to violate it?
It's like Mundschwinger for the Amish. It's a very strange concept.
What's the...
Mundschwinger, it means like...
No, I know what it means. What was the name of the documentary? Devil's Playground?
I never watched it.
Made a documentary about the Amish community and Halakhah.
I've watched, what's it called? Shun.
Oh, okay. So that was the older one.
I watched that one.
But the idea there was like, let the kids do whatever they want, and then 90% of them come back to the community anyway, and they retain them that way. So we don't let the kids do whatever they want. We don't even encourage them to test or experiment. It's like, you're younger, you're not obligated to certain things. Milk and meat, for example. The poskim will say, don't feed them the two at the same time. Just because you're little doesn't mean you should be eating cheeseburgers. How long should I make my kids wait between? It's always about ice cream. Let me save you the guesswork. It's not even hypothetical. It's always about ice cream. Ice cream and milk chocolate. So if they had meat now, how long do they have to wait before they eat ice cream? First of all, it's midrabanan that we wait after, because the Torah doesn't forbid us from eating one after the other. That's a rabbinic concept. Second of all, really depends on the kid. If the child knows this is something we take seriously, it's something that we don't do, and we try to discourage cutting it too close, it's one thing. We're talking about a 2-year-old. So if you happen to have spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, and this 2-year-old happens to go to bed with a bottle of milk, I don't know that it makes sense to delay that process. Welcome to try, you're not going to get very far. So, at any rate, kids can appreciate certain things, and because the shofar happens to be something, if not tangible, at least audible, the kids can appreciate it. It's like something you can tell a child, we're going to blow a shofar, here it's quiet, now it's noisy, now it's quiet again. So this is like, you experience the whole shofar blowing process, and relatively young kids can appreciate that. So again, as long as they're able to keep themselves under control and relatively quiet, it's a great thing. If they're not, it's not so great. But for that matter, let's be honest, there are a lot of adults that can't keep quiet either, so let's not be hypocritical. We should throw them out of the Beit Knesset and make them go somewhere else. Beyond this, there is the topic we mentioned before about the Teruah. So the Gemara says like this. The Torah refers to Yom HaZikaron, the Rosh Hashanah. It refers to it twice as Yom Teruah, once as Yom Zikaron. Therefore, the Gemara as Zichron Teruah. Twice as Yom Teruah, once as Zichron Teruah. So 3 times the Torah tells us we have to create a Teruah on this day. The 3 times that we have to blow the shofar is supposed to be Teruah. Why are half of our Tekiyot Tekiyah, half the sounds that we make, are not Teruah? This is a Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us every time you hear a Teruah, it's supposed to be preceded and succeeded by a Tekiyah. In other words, it's defined by a tqi'ah before, a tqi'ah after. There's the teruah in the middle. So instead of just hearing the teruah 3 times, wondering where it stopped and when it started again, these tekiot actually help us. So technically, we only needed to hear 3 teruot, but because the Mishnah tells us this is a tradition, it's its way, and that the teruah is preceded and followed by tekiah, now we have tekiah, tekiah 3 times. So 3 sounds times 3 equals 9. And Sophia was okay with that. She was ready to go home and be happy. Except, she remembered we had this discussion about what's the actual tradition on teruah. So, if I have to do a tekiah before and after, according to what we call today teruah, it's tekiah, 3 times. But then there's the other opinion that holds tekiah, the teruah, is actually shivarim. So we're going to do tekiah, shivarim, tekiah 3 times. So if you're following me, that's tarat, right? Tekiah, tekiah. Tarat 3 times is 9 sounds. Tashat, tekiah, shivarim, tekiah 3 times is 9 sounds. That's 18. And then what about the opinion that holds that it's both of them together? Before Dawi gets upset. How many more sounds is this? Tekiah, shivarim, tekiah. And we're going to do it 3 times because the Torah says 3 times teruah. So we end up getting what? 4 sounds times 3 repetitions equals 12. So 3 times 3 is 9. Tekiah, teruah, tekiah is 9. Because we do it 3 times. 3 times 3, tekiah, shivarim, tekiah is another 9. And 3 times tekiah, shivarim, teruah, tekiah is now going to be another 12. So 9 plus 9 plus 12, 18 plus 12, 30. Right? And I would have been happy. 30, I fulfilled my biblical obligation. In the event that I'm sick, or I can't sit, or I can't stand, or I'm vomiting, or I don't know what, as long as I can keep my bearings and my wits about me for long enough to hear 30 sounds, fulfilled my obligation midoraita, and for the love of God, go home and take it out. Okay? Fair enough. We don't blow the shofar 30 times on Rosh Hashanah. We blow the shofar 30 times 3 plus 10 plus 1. Just to make this more fun and more exciting. Everyone needs a little bit more math at this hour of the night. So we blow 30 tekiot, 30 sounds in what's called tekiot dimyushav. This is after shachrit. We finish the shachrit, silent recitation, chazan's repetition. Then we do qira'at Torah the way we do every Shabbat and Chag. Afterwards, we're going to make the brachot on the tekiot, except we make the brachot standing up. And then we're going to, next week's shiur, sit down and blow the shofar, hear these 30 sounds. Tarat, 3 times, tashat, 3 times, tashrat, 3 times. Then we continue with some tefillot. Eventually we get back to Ashrei. We do the musaf. During the musaf, we have 2 competing traditions, because this is getting too easy for Florida. It has to be more complicated, otherwise it's not fun. There are 30 sounds that we're going to blow during the musaf, and there are 30 sounds we're going to blow during the silent recitation, and there are 30 more sounds we do during the repetition. Except that there are 2 different traditions to how this is accomplished. There are 3 special brachot in the musaf, right? Incidentally, you may or may not have noticed, every musaf is composed of pretty much, in fact, every Amidah is composed of the same first 3 and last 3 brachot. Right? Baruch Ata Hashem Magen Abraham, Baruch Ata Hashem Mechai Mitim, Baruch Ata Hashem Hayel HaKadosh. And then at the end, it's Baruch Ata Hashem Mahazir Shechinato Letzion, Baruch Ata Hashem Hato Shemcha V'Ochana Ele Hodot, Baruch Ata Hashem Amrech Tamo Yisrael B'Shalom. They never change. We adjust them a little bit for Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, Atzarot Yemei Teshuvah. But the brachot themselves pretty much never change. It's the same on Tisha B'Av as it is on a weekday, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, Chol HaMoed, Yom Tov, etc. So, the 3 special brachot, right? Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. The 3 that we add in the middle of the musaf, not the first 3, not the last 3, but the ones that actually make up what's unique and special about the musaf of any holiday or any day like Shabbat. On Shabbat we only have 1 that ends Baruch Hashem Kodesh Shabbat. So these 3 brachot are all followed by tekiot. In some sidurim, and I believe this is the Ashkenazi tradition as well, but even some Sephardi traditions, they'll do tashat 3 times, Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah 3 times for the first one. They'll do Tarat 3 times, Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah for the second one, and then Tashrat 3 times for the third one. So again, that's 3 times 3 is 9, plus 3 times 3 is 9, 18 plus 3 times 4 is 12, makes 30. And they'll do the same thing when the Chazan repeats it, except that he'll be repeating it and reciting it for everyone. There's another tradition where we do Tashat, Tarat, Tashrat once for each bracha. So it's 3 plus 3 plus 4 is 10, 3 times. You all look angry. Passes, that works. So we're going to hear 3 sets of either each one repeated 3 times individually, or 3 sets of ABC, ABC, ABC. Same way in the silent recitation, so too in the Chazan's repetition. And then after the Musaf, we have a Qadish Titqabal, during which everybody has the custom to do Tashat, Tarat, Tashrat. 3 plus 3 plus 4 is another 10. So 30 from after the Torah reading, we were sitting down. 30 from the Musaf, we're standing up, silent recitation. 30 more from the repetition. This is now 30 plus 30 plus 30 is 90. Then we're going to do 10 more, 3 plus 3 plus 4 in the Qadish Titqabal, the Qadish that we always say after Amidah. And then there's one more at the end of the Tefillah. But before you go home content, there's the Machloket. What's the Machloket? The Ashkenazim do what at the end of the Tefillah and Musaf, Rosh Hashanah? That last sound, the 101st sound. They do Tekiah Gedolah. One long Tekiah. The Sephardim do one long Teruah. We do one long Teruah Gedolah. For as long as you can hold your breath. So it doesn't necessarily. This is really the most customary of all the customary shofar sounds, but there are different opinions as to how it's accomplished.
Slight deviation, but not really.
Sure.
During Musaf, during the 3 added Halakhah, if you start the shofar, if the Chazan starts the shofar before we finish the section, obviously we stop praying during the hearing of the shofar. And what if we can't catch up? Because sometimes it goes.
Yeah, the general rule would be just to stop praying when the shofar is being blown, and then to continue afterwards. In other words, which is interesting, we kind of time this based on the Chazan's pace, and Chazanim tend to pray very quickly when they're praying quietly because they have to make up for the time they shmir when they go really long on their solos. So it's considered good Chazanot to know how to steal time when you need to, so people don't complain if that was too long. They're all bad at it because I can see them doing it. It's okay, most people don't catch up. So we tend to time this according to the Chazan. It's not as crucial that you hear it at these particular points in the tefillah as it is that you hear another 30 sounds, because we want to reach this great 101, which is an interesting number. We'll talk about it next week. Why specifically 101? What does it signify? What does it mean? But clearly at 30 you fulfilled your biblical obligation. And to go back, if we could even just conclude on that point, that's a really big deal. In our generation, we've lost a lot of respect for biblical obligations, meaning I'm not looking to cut it close mideoraita. I want to fulfill all the opinions, customs, obligations, traditions, etc. Okay, hypothetical question. Let's say I'm the rabbi of Bethesda, Maryland, Massachusetts. I spoke to somebody today who asked me about going there for the Haghim. He got a job as a chazan. I think in Massachusetts. Anyway, if there's an old age home, a school, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative synagogue, and maybe a few individuals that can't make it to tefillah for whatever reason, let's say a hospital. Am I doing more of a service by blowing 101 sounds at 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of these places than I would be by doing 30 at each one? So yes, technically the Gemara says we should treat 30 here and 30 there and 30 there plus 10, then we do the extra one. At the end of the day, if there's a biblical obligation to be met, we try to meet this first. And if I'm one man with one shofar, I can only blow so many times in so many places, so I would prioritize getting those 30 done for as many places as I could over getting the 101 done. So it could be that there's someone in the Orthodox shul going, oh, I remember back in the day we used to blow 101 sound. This rabbi is a reformist. So my answer would be, you're right. If we had the luxury of everybody having their own shofar and everybody blowing it for their own obligation, that'd be great. When time is short, and when it's either lots of biblical obligations or one fulfillment of the super obligation, but everybody else gets the short end of the stick, then the responsible halachic thinking is to favor the biblical obligation. Which is why I would say that anybody who can't stand the tefillah, literally can't stand or can't sit, you have problems, issues, challenges, whatever it is. So if you can make those 30, that's a huge accomplishment. Even this 30, bear in mind, contains 3 opinions in it. So we're not going to cut it so close as to say just do 9 sounds and you'll fulfill the obligation, because we don't necessarily feel comfortable enough to say this flies and that doesn't, this one's better than that. That we don't have a tradition of. But when it comes to meeting basic minimal obligations, sometimes people underestimate that. And they make it seem like if you can't sit through 7 hours of tefillah, there's something wrong with you. So, at the risk of editorializing, tefillah used to be much, much shorter than it is today. In fact, you look through the Siddur, look at the Mahzor, you'll find that they actually attribute the name, in some places even the time period and the location of the ones who composed a lot of these poems that we read, say for example during the Musaf, before the Kedusha. Yom Kippur, we have tons of them. There are tefillot that were recited between the Amidah, between Shacharit and Musaf, after Musaf, before Mincha. Probably, going back to what we said in the first portion of the Shiur, everybody had their own personal feelings and inclinations, and they felt inspired, and they wrote, poems that moved them, that elevated the level, I guess, of their tefillot, and maybe even inspired their communities. Clearly, not everyone was reciting everything. That's just impossible. It's not possible from a time standpoint, not possible from a chronological, geographical, historic standpoint, but it's probably much better to say less tefillot with more kavanah than to really press yourself like a lemon and try to get every drop of someone else's tefillot out. But at the end of the day, you might have recited a lot, but with very little meaning or understanding. And for that matter, if you have the time to read a translation of the Mahzor before the Chag, by all means do so. Focus on the Amidah. Finish the Amidah, Shachrit and Musaf. Look through some of the other tefillot that appear, and try to take bits and pieces, but to make them meaningful, definitely get you a lot further than going through everything, even without so much understanding. Taylor, anybody have any questions? No. More tired than you are inquisitive? Fair enough. We will break in difference to Selichot tomorrow morning. And, God's help, we begin